The morning sun painted golden streaks across the towering glass building that dominated the city's skyline. Like ants marching in perfect formation, hundreds of employees streamed through the entrance, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of smartphones, their minds already racing through crowded schedules. Nobody looked down. Nobody noticed the tiny figure standing motionless near the revolving doors, clutching a paper bag that seemed almost comically large for her small hands. Marin was just 6 years old, though her weary eyes suggested she had lived through far more than her young age should allow. Her dress had once been a cheerful blue, but countless washes had faded it to a pale ghost of its former self. Her shoes told their own story, careful stitches ran along both soles, evidence of late-night repairs done by hands that refused to give up. Yet despite everything, a bright yellow ribbon still held her hair back, a small defiance against the gray concrete and steel surrounding her. The morning rush continued uninterrupted. A man in an expensive suit nearly knocked her over as he rushed past, cursing under his breath about a delayed train. A woman balancing 3 coffee cups sidestepped around her without even a glance. Marin remained still, her small chest rising and falling with measured breaths, waiting with a patience that seemed almost supernatural for a child her age. She had learned long ago that the world rarely stopped for little girls. Marcus, the head security guard, had been protecting this building for over 12 years. He had seen everything: angry executives, lost tourists, and once even a runaway dog that somehow found its way into the boardroom. But never, in all his years, had he seen a child arrive alone. Something about the sight made his heart clench. He approached slowly, his heavy boots echoing against the polished marble floor. "Sweetheart," he said, crouching down to her eye level, his voice gentle but concerned, "are you lost? Where are your parents?" Marin looked up at him with eyes that held a calmness that seemed impossible for someone so young. She clutched the paper bag tighter against her tiny chest, as if it contained something precious beyond measure. "My mother works here," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the lobby's constant hum. "She's too sick to come today. I brought her things so she doesn't lose her job." Marcus felt something crack inside him. He had a daughter of his own, about Marin's age. The thought of her traveling alone through the city, facing indifferent strangers in crowded streets, made his blood run cold. And yet, here was this child, standing brave and determined despite everything. Life had been unkind to Marin, yet she carried herself with a dignity that left grown adults speechless. She lived with her mother, Nora, in a cramped apartment at the city's edge, one of those forgotten buildings where the paint peeled like dead skin and the pipes groaned like wounded animals. When rain fell, they arranged buckets across the floor in a desperate symphony of drips and splashes. During winter, they huddled together under every blanket they owned, their breath forming tiny clouds in the frigid air. Nora had been raising Marin alone since the day she was born. No father appeared on birth certificates or birthday cards. There was no extended family to call for help. It was just the two of them against the world, and Nora had faced that world with unbreakable determination. She worked as a cleaner before sunrise, scrubbing offices that belonged to people who would never know her name. On weekends, she washed greasy dishes at a small cafe, her hands cracked and raw from endless exposure to hot water and soap. Sometimes, when exhaustion kept sleep at bay, she stayed awake through the night, sewing clothes for neighbors who could barely afford to pay her. She never complained, not once. She believed that complaining was a luxury she couldn't afford. But children have a way of seeing past the brave faces adults wear. Marin knew her mother was tired. She knew money was always tight. And she knew, in the quiet way children understand these things, that their life was a delicate balancing act that could shatter at any moment. Nora's health had been declining for weeks. A persistent cough that she dismissed as just the change in weather had developed into something far more sinister. Her temperature soared, her body ached, and every breath became a laborious effort. Yet she refused to stay home. Missing work meant missing rent. Missing rent meant eviction. And eviction meant the end of everything she had fought so hard to build. Then came the morning everything fell apart. Nora had been preparing Marin's breakfast when her legs simply gave way. She collapsed onto the kitchen floor, the cracked linoleum cold against her feverish skin. For 2 days, she couldn't rise. Marin watched her mother struggle to breathe, remembering the way nurses on television placed cool cloths on patients' foreheads. She did the same, fetching water and pressing damp towels against Nora's burning skin. "You need to come back with me," Marcus said gently, placing a large, warm hand on Marin's tiny shoulder. We need to call someone. Your mother should see a doctor. No, Marin said, and something in her voice made Marcus pause. She can't miss work. They'll replace her. She told me. Please, I just need to tell her boss she's sorry. Marin had prepared everything carefully before leaving home that morning. She packed her mother's worn cleaning gloves into the paper bag, folded the faded uniform that Nora had worn for years, and slipped beside them an apology letter. She couldn't read every word her mother had written, some of the letters were too complicated, and her mother's handwriting was often shaky from exhaustion, but she understood the essence. It was a plea. A desperate request for forgiveness. A hope that her absence would be overlooked. Without waking her mother, Marin had pressed a gentle kiss on her forehead and whispered a promise she fully intended to keep. She locked the apartment door behind her with the key that hung on a string around her neck. She had memorized the bus route they took every day, the number, the stops, the landmarks, and she had made the journey alone, a tiny warrior on a mission to protect her family. Wait, a female employee said, stepping forward from the growing crowd that had gathered around the security desk. Did you say she traveled here by herself? The receptionist behind the front desk immediately reached for the phone. I'm calling child services, she announced, her voice trembling. This isn't right. A child shouldn't be. Hold on, another voice interrupted. A man in a crisp suit, his expression troubled, stepped forward. Maybe we should think about this before we. Think about what? The receptionist shot back. There's a 6-year-old standing here alone in the lobby of a major corporation. We can't just. She's not in danger, Marcus said firmly, raising his hand. She's standing right here, perfectly calm, trying to help her mother. We need to find out who her mother works for before we do anything drastic. But the commotion had already begun. Word spread through the building faster than any memo could ever travel. Receptionists stopped answering phones. Executives stepped out of meetings. Office assistants gathered near the entrance, their curiosity overriding their professional duties. No one could believe what they were hearing. A 6-year-old had arrived alone, carrying cleaning gloves like they were the most valuable things in the world. Marin stood at the center of it all, completely unfazed. She wasn't seeking attention. She wasn't crying for help. She simply wanted to deliver a message and then go home to her sick mother. For a brief moment, the entire corporation stood still, staring at this small girl who had somehow brought the giant machine to a halt. The company Marin's mother worked for belonged to Rowan Mercer, one of the youngest CEOs in the country. At just 35, he had already achieved what most business leaders spent their entire careers dreaming about. Newspapers called him a genius. Financial magazines featured him on covers, marveling at his ability to transform struggling companies into billion-dollar success stories. Investors adored him. Under his leadership, profits had tripled, and stock prices kept climbing. But there was something missing from all the praise. Rowan Mercer rarely smiled. His employees knew him as a distant figure, someone who existed in conference rooms and board meetings but never seemed quite real. His calendar was planned months in advance, every meeting measured to the exact minute, every decision weighed against cold, hard numbers. He had built his reputation on efficiency, and he believed that emotions had no place in business. Many workers whispered that Rowan had forgotten what ordinary life looked like beyond his office windows. He had never struggled to pay rent. He had never wondered where his next meal would come from. He had never faced the impossible choice between caring for a sick family member and keeping a job. In the world Rowan inhabited, success was measured purely in zeros and commas. That Tuesday morning, Rowan was preparing for the most important meeting of his career. He was negotiating a merger worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a deal that would cement his reputation as one of the greatest business minds of his generation. His team had prepared for weeks. Presentations were polished. Arguments were rehearsed. Every detail had been planned to perfection. Then a knock came at his door. His personal assistant, a young woman named Jennifer who had worked for him for 5 years, poked her head in with an expression he had never seen before. Mr. Mercer, she began hesitantly, there's a situation in the lobby. I think you need to see this. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, Rowan replied without looking up from his notes. Whatever it is, handle it. It's about a little girl, Jennifer pressed. She came here alone. Her mother works here, she cleans the offices. The girl says her mother is sick and afraid of losing her job. Rowan's pen stopped moving. Something in Jennifer's voice, something fragile and desperate, made him look up. She's 6 years old, Jennifer continued. She traveled across the city by herself. She's been standing in the lobby for almost an hour, just trying to deliver her mother's apology letter. For the first time in years, Rowan Mercer hesitated. Rowan couldn't explain what made him cancel the meeting. It was completely irrational, the merger was worth hundreds of millions, and delaying it could have serious consequences. But something about the situation gnawed at him. A 6-year-old girl traveling alone across the city. A sick mother afraid of losing her job. These were not problems that appeared on spreadsheets. He made his way to the lobby, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. His team followed behind him, exchanging confused glances. They had never seen their CEO abandon a meeting before. Some whispered that the merger must be off. Others worried that Rowan had finally cracked under the pressure. But Rowan wasn't thinking about mergers or profits or stock prices. His mind was filled with a strange, unsettling feeling, something he couldn't quite name. It might have been guilt. It might have been curiosity. It might have been something else entirely, something buried deep beneath years of ambition and success. When Rowan stepped into the lobby, the crowd parted immediately. Everyone stepped aside, giving him a clear view of the small figure standing near the security desk. Marin looked up at the approaching man in the expensive suit, and for a moment, Rowan expected fear. He expected tears. He expected the kind of childlike confusion that would make him feel uncomfortable. Instead, he found a calmness that took his breath away. Marin didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him with those impossibly old eyes and asked, very politely, "Are you the boss? Can you please tell my mother's supervisor that she's sorry she couldn't come to work?" Rowan felt something shift inside him. He slowly knelt down until he was at eye level with Marin, his tailored suit brushing against the polished floor. Up close, he noticed details he might have missed from a distance. The careful stitching on her shoes. The tiny scratches on her hands from helping around the apartment. The exhaustion that lingered behind her calm expression. She was just a child. A child who had traveled alone through a dangerous city to protect her sick mother. And in that moment, Rowan saw himself. His company, his success, his carefully constructed world, through completely different eyes. The numbers on his spreadsheet suddenly seemed hollow. The billion-dollar deals felt meaningless. All that mattered was the small girl standing in front of him, fighting to hold her family together. Instead of sending Marin away, Rowan surprised everyone by asking her a question that no one expected. "Will you show me where your mother works?" The request hung in the air like smoke. Marin hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. She led Rowan through the building, her tiny hand gesturing toward the elevators. The executive team followed at a respectful distance, exchanging glances of disbelief. Their CEO, who normally couldn't be bothered to visit the break room, was now taking a personal tour from a 6-year-old. They reached the office floor long before the regular staff arrived. The cleaning carts waited quietly in the hallway, neatly arranged like soldiers awaiting orders. Buckets, cloths, and bottles of disinfectant stood in perfect formation, exactly where Nora had left them. Marin walked through the rows of desks with a sullen reverence. She pointed to each area, the conference room where her mother had cleaned, the executive offices where she dusted carefully, the bathroom that she scrubbed until every tile sparkled. She explained, in her quiet, matter-of-fact voice, that her mother always said every desk belonged to someone trying their best. "She says they're all working hard for their families," Marin said softly. "That's why she cleans each one carefully. So they can focus on their jobs without worrying about messy desks." Several employees behind Rowan wiped their eyes. Others stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Rowan himself felt a weight pressing against his chest. He had walked through these offices countless times, but he had never truly seen them. He had never thought about the invisible hands that made everything shine. Marin reached the cleaning cart and gently placed the gloves on top, as if returning something sacred. She stepped back, her mission accomplished. "Can you tell her boss she's sorry?" she asked again. Rowan knelt down once more and met her eyes. I'll do better than that, he said quietly. I'm going to talk to her myself. Rowan instructed his driver to prepare the company car. The luxury vehicle gleamed in the morning light, its engine purring like a contented cat. Marin climbed in carefully, her small hands gripping the leather seat as if she had never sat in anything so comfortable. Perhaps she hadn't. The car's interior was spotless, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and success. Employees watched from the lobby windows as the car pulled away. They wondered what was happening. Where their CEO was going with the mysterious little girl. Some assumed he was taking her to child services. Others hoped he was doing something more compassionate. But nobody could have predicted the truth. Rowan's driver followed Marin's directions through the city, leaving behind the gleaming towers of the financial district and entering neighborhoods that Rowan had never visited. The streets grew narrower, the buildings older, the signs in different languages. Children played in empty lots. Laundry hung from apartment windows like faded flags of survival. Finally, the car stopped outside an aging apartment building. The paint was peeling. The front door hung slightly crooked. Rowan climbed out, his expensive shoes crunching against the gravel. He carried grocery bags filled with food items he had purchased at a nearby store, along with medicine from a pharmacy and fresh flowers that Marin had insisted her mother would love. The building's narrow stairwell smelled like cooking oil and old wood. Rowan climbed carefully, his suit feeling increasingly out of place with each step. Marin led the way, her small hand gripping the railing. She stopped at a door on the third floor, its paint chipped and faded. Nora opened the door slowly, her body trembling with fever. She was a small woman, worn down by years of hard work. When she saw Rowan, an impeccably dressed stranger standing in her hallway, her eyes widened with shock. Then she saw the groceries, the medicine, the flowers. And she saw Marin standing beside him, holding her mother's cleaning gloves. "I'm sorry," Nora gasped, reaching for the door. "I couldn't come to work. I tried, but I'll come back as soon as I can. Please don't fire me." Rowan gently held up his hand. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said quietly. "I'm Rowan Mercer. I own the company. And I'm here to help." Rowan stepped inside the tiny apartment and felt his heart break. The room was small, barely large enough for the furniture arranged within it. The sofa sagged in the middle, worn from years of use. The refrigerator hummed loudly, struggling to keep its contents cool. But despite everything, the space was immaculately clean. School drawings covered the refrigerator, bright crayon depictions of flowers, family, and sons. A small bookshelf held worn children's books borrowed from the public library, their spines cracked from being read over and over. This was a home built on sacrifice. Every piece of furniture, every toy, every meal represented hours of grueling work. Nora had given everything she had to provide for her daughter, and Rowan could see it all laid out before him. He looked at Marin's drawings more closely. One showed two figures holding hands, a tall, stick-figure mother and a smaller child. Above them, a bright yellow sun smiled down. It was such a simple image, yet it contained multitudes. It represented hope. It represented love. It represented everything that Nora had fought to preserve through years of poverty and exhaustion. "Your daughter is remarkable," Rowan said, turning to Nora. "She traveled across the city alone just to bring your apology letter. She was calm. She was brave. She refused to leave until she had done everything she could." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want her to see how difficult things are," she whispered. "I tried to protect her from it." "You did protect her," Rowan replied gently. "You taught her how to care for others. That's something no amount of money can buy." Marin approached her mother carefully, offering the fresh flowers. Nora took them, her hands trembling, and buried her face in their petals. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice cracking. "I should have been more careful." "I should have." "You should have asked for help," Rowan interrupted gently. "And I should have made it easier for you to ask." Rowan sat on the worn sofa, his expensive suit looking wildly out of place against the faded fabric. Nora sat across from him, still trembling with fever. Marin had made her mother a cup of tea. She handled the kettle with practiced care, an adult competence that seemed impossible for such a small child. She placed the cup in Nora's hands and stepped back, watching her mother take her first sip. For a long moment, no one spoke. The apartment's refrigerator hummed in the background. A car horn blared somewhere in the street below. The afternoon sun poured through the window, illuminating floating dust particles like tiny stars. "I need to apologize," Rowan finally said. "I've been running the company for years, and I've never thought about people like you. I've looked at spreadsheets and profit margins in quarterly reports, but I've never looked at the people who make those reports possible." Nora stared at him, uncertain where this was going. "I'm just a cleaner," she said quietly. "Nobody expects." "You're not just anything," Rowan interrupted firmly. "You're raising a remarkable child. You're working yourself to exhaustion to provide for her. You're showing up every single day, even when everything in your body is telling you to stop. That takes more strength than I've ever shown." Marin had crept closer, her small hand finding her mother's. Nora squeezed it, her eyes still wet with tears. "I don't have much money," Nora admitted. "I can't afford." "I'm not here to collect anything," Rowan said gently. "I'm here to give. Starting today, you have paid medical leave. Full salary. As long as you need to recover. And after that, well, we'll figure out something better for you. Something that doesn't require you to sacrifice your health for a paycheck." Nora's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at Rowan, then at Marin, then back at Rowan. For the first time in years, the weight she carried seemed a little lighter. Rowan returned to headquarters that afternoon with a completely different perspective. The gleaming tower that had once represented his greatest achievement suddenly felt hollow. The numbers that used to thrill him now seemed meaningless. He had spent his entire career building something impressive, but he had forgotten what it was supposed to be for. The boardroom was quiet when he entered. His executives sat in neat rows, waiting for instructions. They expected him to resume business as usual. They expected him to discuss stock prices, quarterly targets, and the next major deal. But Rowan had other plans. "I want to talk about people," he began. "Not profits. Not quarterly projections. Not any of the things we usually discuss." The executives exchanged confused glances. Rowan continued. "I saw something today that changed everything. A 6-year-old girl traveled across the city alone to deliver her mother's apology letter. Her mother is a cleaner in this building, someone who scrubs our floors and dusts our desks and ensures that we work in a clean environment. Do you know how much she earns?" He looked around the room. No one answered. "Barely enough to survive," Rowan said. "She works for this company for years, and she earns less than we spend on a single executive lunch. She has no health insurance, no sick leave, no safety net. And she's not alone. There are hundreds of people in this building who face the same struggles." The room fell silent. "We're going to change that," Rowan declared. "Starting today, we're providing paid medical leave for every single employee in this building. We're introducing affordable health coverage for every cleaner, maintenance worker, and security guard. We're creating emergency family assistance funds. We're investing in our people, not because it's profitable, but because it's right." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Some executives nodded in agreement. Others looked doubtful. But Rowan didn't wait for approval. He had made up his mind. The board of directors was not pleased. They had invested millions in Rowan's vision, and they expected returns. When the news of his new initiatives reached them, they summoned him to an emergency meeting. "We can't afford this," one director argued, his face red with frustration. "The cost of providing health coverage to every employee, it's astronomical. Our profit margins will take a hit. Shareholders will panic." "I'm not asking for permission," Rowan replied calmly. "I'm informing you of the changes." Another director spoke up, her voice sharp. "You've built a brilliant career on financial discipline. Don't throw it all away for a sentimental gesture. One little girl's story is touching, but it doesn't justify." "It justifies everything," Rowan interrupted. "I've been running this company for years, and I've never stopped to ask what we actually stand for. We talk about excellence. We talk about innovation. But we've forgotten the most important thing: people. The people who work here, who sacrifice for us, who keep this building running while we focus on our deals. The first director leaned forward. You're risking everything. The company could. Or it could thrive, Rowan countered. Companies built on fear eventually crumble. But companies built on respect create loyalty that's impossible to buy. I've seen it happen. I've watched it transform businesses. And I believe it will transform ours. The directors were skeptical. They needed proof. They needed results. And Rowan was prepared to give them exactly that, not through arguments or presentations, but through action. He was determined to show them that compassion wasn't weakness. It was the foundation of lasting success. The changes Rowan implemented were immediate and tangible. Emergency assistance funds were created, providing quick support to employees facing unexpected family crises. Scholarship programs for employees' children were announced. Mental health support was introduced, offering confidential counseling for those who needed it. The reaction from the staff was overwhelmingly positive. People who had never spoken to one another before now shared smiles in hallways. Managers began thanking their cleaning staff. Executives invited maintenance workers to join them for lunch, genuinely interested in their stories. The building, once cold and impersonal, began to feel like a community. But the most profound transformation was invisible. Employees who had spent years feeling invisible suddenly felt seen. People who had carried their burdens in silence finally found the courage to share them. A culture of compassion began to emerge, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose. One employee, a security guard who had worked for the company for 20 years, approached Rowan in the lobby. "I've been here longer than anyone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And this is the first time I've ever felt like part of something." Rowan shook his hand firmly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you." As weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. Employee turnover dropped to historic lows. Productivity increased significantly. Customer satisfaction reached levels that even Rowan hadn't predicted. The investors who had doubted him were astounded by the results. Compassion, it turned out, was not a weakness. It was the most powerful asset of all. With proper medical care and time to heal, Nora's health slowly improved. The persistent cough that had haunted her for months finally subsided. The fever that had kept her bedridden eventually faded. She gained weight, her cheeks filled with color, and the deep circles under her eyes began to disappear. But the most significant change was internal. For the first time in years, Nora wasn't afraid. She no longer woke up wondering whether they would have enough money to survive the month. She no longer forced herself to work through illness because she couldn't afford to miss a single paycheck. She was finally free to focus on what truly mattered, her health, her daughter, and her future. "I don't know how to thank you," she told Rowan one afternoon, during a visit to his office. Marin sat beside her, coloring quietly on the floor, occasionally looking up to watch the adults talk. "You don't have to thank me," Rowan replied. "You've done all the hard work. You raised a remarkable child. You faced impossible circumstances and never gave up. I'm just giving you the support you always deserved." Nora looked down at Marin, her eyes glistening. "I wanted to protect her from all of this. I didn't want her to see how hard life is." "You couldn't protect her from reality," Rowan said gently. "What you did was even more important. You showed her how to face it with grace." When Nora finally returned to work, it wasn't because she desperately needed the money. It was because she loved the community that had embraced her. Rowan offered her a supervisory position, better hours, higher pay, and the ability to spend afternoons with Marin. She accepted gratefully, excited to begin a new chapter. The employees of the corporation unofficially adopted Marin as their own. She became the building's little ray of sunshine, bringing warmth to the cold, professional atmosphere. Whenever she visited, people would gather around, eager to see her smile, hear her stories, and share their own. Birthdays were celebrated together in the lobby, with balloons and cakes and cheers that echoed through the building. School supplies appeared whenever Marin needed them, a backpack here, a notebook there, pencils and crayons and all the little things that make learning fun. Retired accountants volunteered to help with homework, patiently explaining fractions and spelling. Engineers organized science days, showing Marin the wonders of chemistry, physics, and the stars. Designers taught drawing classes. Programmers helped with math. The security guards taught her how to play chess. The cafeteria staff saved her favorite snacks. Everyone wanted to give something back to the child whose simple act of love had reminded them what truly mattered. Marin blossomed in this new environment. She became more confident, more playful, more like the child she had always deserved to be. The exhaustion in her eyes faded, replaced by a spark of joy. She made friends, real friends, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged. Everyone knows her now, Nora remarked one evening, watching Marin draw at the kitchen table. The whole building loves her. She loves them too, Rowan replied, visiting for dinner as he often did. She's taught all of us something we desperately needed to learn. Spring arrived with a burst of color and warmth, and the company decided to host a family celebration in the courtyard. Thousands of flowers bloomed in carefully arranged beds. Colored balloons floated lazily against the clear blue sky. Music filled the air, and the scent of freshly grilled food wafted through the breeze. Employees gathered with their families, spouses, partners, children, and pets. Laughter echoed across the courtyard. People who had worked together for years finally met each other's loved ones. Barriers that had separated executives from maintenance workers dissolved in the shared joy of the moment. Rowan stood before the crowd, his voice amplified by the speakers. He spoke about the journey they had taken, the changes they had made, and the future they were building together. The applause was deafening when he announced the Marin Initiative. A new program providing emergency support for employees facing unexpected family hardships. The first plaque, displayed near the company entrance, carried a simple message: no one should have to choose between caring for family and keeping a job. Visitors stopped to read those words every day, and many spoke of the warmth that such a gesture represented. But the most anticipated moment was yet to come. Rowan invited the audience to look up toward the stage, where a small figure was about to appear, accompanied by her mother. The crowd roared with approval as Marin walked forward in a bright blue dress, new, beautiful, a stark contrast to the faded dress that had once defined her. The applause continued for several minutes. Marin stood at the microphone, her small hand gripping it tightly. She looked out at the sea of faces. Hundreds of employees who had once rushed past her without seeing her. Now, they were cheering her name, their eyes shining with admiration. Rowan stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Marin's shoulder. "We've learned a lot this year," he said, addressing the crowd. "We've learned that compassion isn't weakness. We've learned that success isn't measured in dollars and cents. We've learned that the greatest leaders aren't those who stand above people. They're those who stand beside them when they need it most." He turned to Marin, his voice softening. "One little girl came to us with nothing but love and courage. She changed everything. She taught us that the smallest voice can deliver the most powerful message." Marin leaned toward the microphone, her voice small but clear. "I just wanted to help my mommy. I didn't know I would help everyone else too." The crowd burst into another round of applause. People wiped their eyes, their hearts full of emotion. Nora stood at the edge of the stage, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Her daughter, her brave, amazing daughter, had become a symbol of hope for an entire corporation. "We can't promise we'll always get it right," Rowan continued, "but we can promise to keep trying. We can promise to remember that behind every title, every position, every job, there's a person. A person with dreams and struggles and a family counting on them." The Marin Initiative quickly became one of the most valued programs in the company. Emergency funds provided immediate assistance to employees in crisis. Family support services helped people navigate difficult situations. Mental health resources offered professional care without stigma. Employees who had never felt comfortable seeking help began to reach out. A single father whose child needed surgery received immediate support. A grandmother caring for her grandchildren got the financial assistance she desperately needed. A young woman battling anxiety found a therapist who understood her struggles. The program saved careers. It saved families. It saved lives. New hires heard the story of Marin during orientation. They learned about the little girl who had changed everything. They listened to the words of Rowan Mercer, the CEO who had made the radical decision to invest in people over profits. The story became part of the company's identity, a symbol of everything they had become. "What happened to us was extraordinary," one executive told a group of new employees. "A child reminded us why we actually matter. Not because we make money, but because we care for people." The ripple effects spread beyond the company. Other businesses began adopting similar initiatives. The local community benefited from increased charitable giving. Families who had struggled for years found unexpected support. The story of Marin inspired not just one organization but an entire movement of compassion. Months turned into years, and the company continued to thrive. Employee turnover remained low. Productivity stayed high. Customer satisfaction reached levels that seemed impossible in the days before Marin's visit. The board of directors, once skeptical, became strong advocates for the new culture. "We were wrong," the first director admitted during an annual meeting. "We thought compassion was a luxury we couldn't afford. But it turned out to be the most valuable investment we ever made." Rowan smiled, but his mind wandered back to that bright Tuesday morning when a small girl in a faded blue dress had appeared in the lobby. He remembered the careful stitches on her shoes, the quiet strength in her eyes, the yellow ribbon that defied the grayness of the building. Change doesn't come from big speeches, he reflected. It comes from small moments of courage. It comes from ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Employees still remembered the story. They told it to their children, their families, and everyone who would listen. It became a legend, a story of hope, sacrifice, and the power of a simple act of love. One autumn evening, years after the events that changed everything, Marin returned to the building. She was no longer a small child clutching a paper bag. She was a teenager, confident and bright, ready to begin an internship at the company her mother had worked for. The employees welcomed her warmly. Security guards remembered her. Receptionists smiled as she walked through the lobby. The maintenance staff, many of whom had joined after the Marin initiative was established, greeted her with genuine affection. Rowan Mercer, older now but still leading with the same vision, shook her hand firmly. "Welcome to our company," he said. "You belong here." Marin smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you for everything," she replied. "Thank you for believing in my mother. Thank you for believing in me." "Your mother taught you something we all needed to learn," Rowan said. "Courage doesn't require power. It requires love. And you had more of that than anyone I've ever met." Marin's internship marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for the company she would one day help lead. The legacy of a 6-year-old girl with a faded blue dress and a yellow hair ribbon continued to inspire everyone who walked through those doors. As the sun set over the city, casting golden light across the gleaming glass tower, Marin walked through the lobby one last time that evening. She paused at the plaque bearing her name, the Marin Initiative, and read the words engraved beneath it. No one should have to choose between caring for family and keeping a job. She thought about her mother, now healthy and happy, supervising a team she had once been part of. She thought about Rowan, who had chosen compassion over profit and transformed a corporation into a community. And she thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by that bright Tuesday morning so many years ago. "A small act of kindness," she whispered, "can change everything." The building hummed with activity. Employees rushed past, their eyes fixed on phones, meetings, and deadlines. But something had changed. People smiled now. They said hello. They remembered that behind every title, every position, every job, there was a human being. A person with dreams and fears and a family who loved them. Marin stepped outside into the warm evening air and took a deep breath. She remembered the little girl she had once been, standing alone in this same spot, carrying a paper bag that held everything her mother owned. She remembered the fear and the hope and the impossible courage that had carried her forward. Now, years later, she was living proof that kindness always wins. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would spend the rest of her life paying that lesson forward. Asterisk if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Together, we can spread hope, compassion, and the belief that ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Asterisk. Asterisk leave a comment, kindness always wins. Asterisk.